for it. I wanna welcome everyone here and say thanks for joining us tonight. This is the third in our series, and I'm so excited to be part of this and that you are part of it as well. And I've said this a few times already, but if you've just joined recently, I want to give a special welcome to people who are new to this, who maybe, this is hosted by Mennonite Church Eastern Canada, but you don't have to be a Mennonite to be here. And there are Indigenous folks, people from all communities, all faiths, all denominations that have been represented in our talks previously, and I hope the same is true tonight. So I'm Scott Morton Ninomiya. I'm the moderator for tonight. I'm going to introduce another couple people to you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Sam and Lyndsay tonight, and I'll be introducing them more formally in a moment. Before I do that, I want to let people know that this is being recorded. So if you don't wish to be recorded, you have a couple different options. You can turn off your camera. You can also mute yourself, and you can also rename yourself. So if you go to the top left corner of your own little box, you'll see 3 dots. You can click on that and it'll give you the option to rename yourself. And you can rename yourself whatever you like so that you can't be identified, even though you're in a recording. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. So now that we are getting into this, and I was just about to thank Lisa and then she muted me. So maybe, but I'm still gonna thank her because Lisa Williams is our tech support person. She's been doing a fantastic job this entire time. And if you have tech issues, you can get in touch with her. You can chat through to her. Is there another way people can get in touch with you, Lisa, if they're having problems with connecting to Zoom?
The other way would be only by email, lwilliams@mcec.ca. I can put that in the chat.
Great. Okay. So if you have tech problems, please do get in touch with Lisa and she can help you sort those out. So before we go any further, I want to acknowledge the land that I am on. And we've been acknowledging in the chat box all the many different lands that we are on. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that the land that I belong to is the Grand River watershed, and it's the land that sustains me. It's the land that provides everything that myself and my family need, and everything comes from the land, which is the earth. So that's first. Second, I want to acknowledge that this land, the Grand River watershed where I live, is the traditional and present day territory of the Haudenosaunee, Chinotan, also known as Neutral, and Anishinaabe peoples. And these are the people who care for this land right up to today in 2020, as they have for so many centuries before this. Third, I want to say that I'm a settler on this land, and I'm working at taking my rightful place, walking behind the Indigenous peoples of this land. And taking that position, I want to say, does not diminish myself because I'm proud of who I am and where I'm from. But walking behind is where I can do the learning and listening that I must do to be part of dismantling colonialism. So that is my land acknowledgement. And finally, I'll just say that as a settler, I'm pursuing practical answers to the question, how can I live on this land in ways that do not perpetuate the destruction and dispossession that has gone on for far too long of the many colonial systems that are in place today. And that could include energy systems, political, legal systems, many other kinds of systems. And I want to work at that together with other settlers and Indigenous peoples on this land. And that brings me to tonight. So this is part of that work of dismantling colonialism. And it's why we, and when I say we, it's us, the members of the Truth and Reconciliation Working Group, we put together this online learning series. When COVID hit, we knew that we would have to try some new ways of engaging on Indigenous issues. So we thought, what if we do an online learning series? So we invited a number of speakers. We've held 2 of these already. And the theme of this series is treaties as sacred covenants. So, as from speaking from our perspective as a working group, as Mennonites, we're familiar with covenants in the Bible. and how those are sacred agreements that have lasted for a long time. They're not something to be cast aside and say, this is old news. We don't need to pay attention to this anymore. They're just as relevant today as they were a long time ago. And so we want to show people the equivalency between those covenants that we might read about in the Bible and what have you, and the treaties that have been made broken, and we're hoping to renew them across this land that we call home. So that's part of what we're doing tonight. And tonight specifically, we'll be hearing from Lyndsay and Sam, who I'll introduce formally, as I said, in a moment. They are going to be sharing about the history and present of Treaty 9 territory and probably beyond that, I think. And they'll be sharing about covenants made broken and the possibilities for renewal. And part of the story in Treaty 9 involves residential schools. So we will be discussing parts of that story tonight. So I want to make you aware of that. So that, for one, you can keep yourself safe, because that is not an easy thing to discuss. And I also want to do that so that we can, I want to invite us to take care of each other, because when we talk about difficult issues, that can be hard. So some people tonight, and so I want to just invite you to be part of contributing to respectful dialogue and maintaining a safe space for people who have joined us tonight, every one of us. And I also want to make you aware that some of the people on this call tonight have experience with residential schools as students and teachers, and perhaps in other roles. And while there is no doubt that this is a time of reckoning when it comes to residential schools, as that reckoning unfolds, those of us who are part of it need to be respectful. And so please be mindful of your words and actions tonight, knowing who's part of the community that we're creating online here tonight. So with that, I want to introduce you to Mim Harder, who's playing an important role in that regard tonight. She's helping us create that safe and respectful community, and she'll be providing support to people who may want to talk or debrief after or even during this meeting tonight. And I believe, Lisa, you have her information there. If you want to reach Mim, you can do so at 519-745-8458, extension 362. That'll put you directly through to Mim. So yes, that's her role. And another part of her role is to do an opening prayer for us. So I want to invite Mim to, actually, just before I invite Mim to do that, I just want to make sure that everybody, I just want to ask the working group if I've missed anything. You can remind me now. Excellent. Okay.
Words. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And so yes, Mim, please open in prayer for us.
All right. Thank you, Miigwech. Since we are talking about Treaty 9 and the Anishinaabe peoples, I am going to virtually smudge you all. I have lit a smudge of sage and sweetgrass and tobacco. It is often the way that things are started in a good way in the northern communities and down south here as well. There are communities that have started using this tradition even though it is not part of their traditional way of doing, but it is a nice way of just taking that moment to stop and to clean everything out of your head and be ready to listen and learn to what is happening tonight. And also in honor, the last few times I've done the Thanksgiving address, which is more Haudenosaunee way of starting an evening. Tonight I am going to do a prayer of the four directions in honor of our Anishinaabe peoples. So I know you're all in front of computers and you can't stand up and face the four directions, but I'm going to ask you to think of the direction as we go through them. We look to the east. Great Spirit of light, come to me out of the east with the power of the rising sun. Let there be light in my words. Let there be light on my path that I walk. Let me remember always that you give the gift of a new day, and never let me be burdened with sorrow by not starting over again. And I just want to remind you every day that the sun comes up, we have a new chance to write the best story that we can. We look to the south. Great Spirit of love, come to me with the power of the south. Make me courageous when the cold winds fall upon me, and send me the warm and soothing winds. Comfort me and caress me when I am tired and cold. Unfold me like the gentle breezes that unfold the leaves on the trees. As you give all to the earth, your warm moving wind, give that to me so that I may grow close to you in warmth. And we look to the west. Great life-giving Spirit, I face the west, the direction of sundown. Let me remember every day that the moment will come when my sun will go down. Never let me forget that I must fade into you. Give me a beautiful color. Give me a great sky for setting so that when it is my time to meet you, I can come with glory. And we look to the north, where the cold winds often blow. Make me courageous when those winds blow. Give me strength and endurance for everything that is harsh, everything that hurts, everything that makes me squint. Let me move through life, ready to take what comes from the north. And with these, we turn to Creator, who made all of us in our own way and gave us each our path to walk. We give our best words to our Creator, and we ask Him to walk with us through this evening and open our hearts and our ears and our minds to what the words that will be spoken. Chimigwech, yo. Thank you. Amen.
Thank you so much, Min. Now, actually, before I introduce the speakers, I just want to bring everyone's attention to the fact that Lisa posted in the chat. Lisa posted Min's number, so if you need to access that, you can. And yeah, now I will, thank you to Mim, and I don't want to forget to mention Peter. Peter is our chat moderator for tonight. And can you wave, Peter? I don't know if everyone can see him, but his role, he's going to be watching the chat. And if you have questions, you can post them there in the chat. So as the speakers are sharing with us, I invite you to be formulating questions in your mind, and you can put them in the chat. And Peter, at the end, when the speakers are done speaking and sharing with us, then Peter will be collecting all of those and sharing them with the speakers so that we can have a bit of a Q&A. That's how we'll do the Q&A. Yeah, so I just want to not neglect Peter so that you know who he is and what he's doing. He's got an important role tonight. So now it's time to introduce the speakers. And those are Sam Achneepineskum and Lyndsay Mollins Koene. And Elder Sam Achneepineskum is from Ogoki Post in Martin Falls First Nation. And he's the survivor of 3 Indian residential schools. He's a knowledge and language keeper and has worked extensively throughout the Robinson Superior, Treaty 9, and Treaty 3 areas of Northern Ontario. He also traveled to 5 cities across Canada to help deliver the CBC Massey Lectures in 2018 with Tanya Talaga. And I've been told he's a very humble man, so that's probably only a very small part of the story that you're getting, but hopefully you'll share more of that with us tonight. And Lyndsay Mollins Koene is honored to have spent 25 years working with Mennonite Central Committee's Indigenous Neighbors program. And as coordinator, she partners with First Nations and Indigenous organizations throughout Ontario. Lyndsay earned a Master's of Education, but she feels it is the traditional knowledge shared with her by Indigenous teachers over the years that has brought to life the work she does with communities. Lyndsay works with MCEC, Mennonite Central Committee, Timmins Regional Office, on the traditional territory of the Matagami First Nation as part of Treaty 9. And she lives with her partner, Job, and her children, Christian and Amanda. And so I'm going to hand it over to our speakers. And if there's anything further you want to say to introduce yourselves, please go ahead.
Thank you. Sam, are you unmuted?
Can you hear me?
Hey, good.
All right. There's no stopping me now.
Oh, good. Do you want to head off?
Oh, go ahead. You start.
Well, I need to start by talking about Sam and I and why we're here together tonight for this particular event. And almost 30 years ago, I was saying to Sam earlier today, we met in Hornpain First Nation, and Job and I were there as guests of the community. And Sam was facilitating as part of Matawa Tribal Council at the time, correct, Sam? A crisis team, because there had been some tragedies in the community. And so there we were, and we together spent some time together with community members. And it was what, 10 years now ago, Sam, that Sam walked up to me at a Chiefs meeting in Timmins. Time went by. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. And but I saw Sam at that particular Nan Chiefs meeting, Anishinaabe Ascii Nation Chiefs meeting, and he walked over, and so Sam came up to me and asked where I could find the Mennonite Pope, and so it got funnier because you know, really there isn't a Mennonite Pope, as most of you know, and so we got to talking. He said, it's about those Mennonite schools. You know, we got to talk about those Mennonite schools. You know, where should we start? And so you know, that story began, and here we are tonight. And Sam's on Zoom. So I mean, you know, I think including some of the key voices as part of that story is very important. And I'm just going to say that I'm so, you know, pleased to be in Treaty 9, doing the work I've been doing in partnership with communities for quite some time now, along with Job. And the work is good, rich, and never gets stale. It doesn't repeat itself, really, for the most part. And I feel very grateful, as Scott shared in the introduction, for the unbelievable stories and pieces of knowledge that have been shared with me. And I consider it a great honor to be able to, you know, call Sam and say, hey, Sam, let's do this thing. And those are moments and relationships that are built over time. And I'm so pleased to see faces here tonight, faces that I know, you know, past and present. You know, I see Vince, I see Diane, I see, you know, there are many of you. And so just welcome to tonight. Sam.
Oh, hi. Okay. Good evening to all of you. All those people are online. And Zooming is quite new to me. It's, I think, probably about the second time or third time that I've been on Zoom. And I guess you're never too old to learn new stuff, new things. Well, anyway, I've known, no, I forgot her name now.
Lyndsay?
Well, anyway, Lyndsay, that's her name. Yeah, and quite a long time. It was 94 around there, 93. We first met, and shortly after, I worked at Matawa, and I went home and got a job here in Thunder Bay as a residential school project coordinator, and which entails a lot of research, we made a couple of videos, we made a couple of books, and also developed curriculum for use in schools, and also we got in touch with a lot of the churches that run the schools, and we invited them to our gatherings, and Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and there were people that went to in Treaty 9. There were a number of people that went to the Mennonite schools up in north of Silicon, Pickle Lake, and we wanted to know who run those things and how to get in touch with folks that worked there or who was the one who ran them. And so we went about the roundabout way. I think a lot of the people that worked at the school worked out of the Dryden. There's a group of people there that kind of operated the school, but they weren't really much interested in talking to us, or we didn't get that much information from them. So thinking that the central committee was the one that was kind of was the overall group that looked after the Mennonite schools, Mennonite people, and in Ontario. So we got a hold of them. We thought we had a good conversations over a period of time with them, and invited them to our gatherings. And from that we worked together on a number of things, and it was good. And so, but I worked a lot in the social and health field, in northern communities. I traveled to each and every community on Treaty 9 territory, and everything from all the communities from Sudbury to Manitoba border. So I've been around, put a few miles on my old vehicle here, and so I get to meet a lot of people. I get to know a lot of the issues that people are find themselves in, the difficulties and some of the things that they're doing. And so so I've always been interested in that. I've always been interested in looking at the social issues that are happening in our communities, and wondering where it came from, finding out the root causes of all those things. I've always been told by the elder that if you want to fix something, you have to go back to the beginning and start from there. And I talked to a lot of people, did a lot of research, and I find myself here today with talking to you folk about some of those things that I learned over time. And so, it's been a very interesting life. And the last, I spent since '92, I think, was the first time that I did a residential school gathering. There were 2 people that came, and of course nobody talked about it much back then. But we kept on going. We kept pushing it, and when you think about something and you want to try something, there's always things that happen. Things are put people or things are put in your place to help you and to what you want to do. So that's what happened. I got a job, and then as a residential school project coordinator, and that I really took off from there, and we're able to do a lot of things, which I'm glad. I'm kind of tired now. and so with that, okay, Lyndsay, I'll let you speak a little bit more.
Okay. So, we'll maybe start the slide program, but I just wanted to tell you that the word Ascii means in the Cree language means land. And, you know, when Sam and I were talking about this evening, we were discussing the fact that, you know, it all began, like Sam was just saying, in the beginning with the land. And, you know, way before the schools. And that was a good thing. And so, I mean, this is a goose camp that we were invited to a while back, a spring goose camp. And you'll see the geese hanging on the trees all around the camp. And I think Sam wants to speak to the next slide. Are you all right there, Sam?
Yeah.
To speak to
Okay.
Yeah.
This is me as a very young man. I grew up in the bush in the land. I didn't go to school till I was 12 years old. So, and I lived out there in the land with my parents, my grandparents, and extended family. So I learned about living out there, hunting, fishing, and trapping, and preparing animals, and snowshoes and sleds and all those things that we did out there. So we never really got to leave the land. I'll go outside into the city or in the town or anything like that. And so we just lived out there all year round, living in the tent all year round. A very, very simple life. And living that and the land was very important because the land provided everything for me. Everything that I needed was there. When we left in the fall to go out into our trap line, we just took the bare necessities, you know, the flour, sugar, and a few other things. Everything else, the land provided. I traveled the rivers, or I walked either on the boat, or you know, later on we got a skidoo, but we did a lot of walking, my dad and I, when we trapped and lived out there in the land. And so I learned a lot of things, and I learned about the ability that you have to do things, that there's always something to be done, to be able to take care of yourself, look after yourself, and not to be dependent on anybody to do things for you. These are the very rare lessons that I'll learn out of the land. And I really, this is a place that I call home, even now to this present day. Thunder Bay is a place where I live because I have to. But when I go up north, back home along the rivers and the forest, that's still my home, and that's where I feel at home. And so, that's where I come from, and a lot of the lessons that I learned about life, about the understanding of life, and our connection to the land, to the water, to all of those things come from the time that I spent growing up out there. Very important. All right, Lyndsay.
So I think we'll switch slides here.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, from the land, you know, I just wanted everyone to know what we're talking about tonight when we talk about Treaty 9. So, I mean, if you look at the light green shaded area on your map, that is Treaty 9. It's 2/3 of the province. And so just a few quick facts about Treaty 9, something, you know, and that's quite a mess for Ontario. 34 of the 49 communities represented by Treaty 9 are fly-in only, so they're remote, and that means they've got like there are all sorts of challenges that come with remote living, as you can imagine. So you know, everything from the social issues that Sam was talking about, like healthcare and you know, just basic necessities like food. All those things are very, very hard to get a grip on. Water, and then there are other things, simply access to resources, whether it's a job, whether it's school, whether it's, employment, all those things become more of a challenge.
Yeah, and if you look at the map, and if you go right in the smack dab in the middle of Ontario, you will find a little community called Martin Falls, and that's where I come from.
It's blue.
It's blue. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Everyone see it?
Yeah, and that's where I come from, and that's where the rivers that you see along that community is all the way up to Fort Albany. We used to go by boat to Albany and also up to Hearst. We would travel by boat along those rivers. So that's where I grew up, and that's home. And it was hard to think about, outside of my family, what the world was like outside of that. And because that was my whole world, was just my family, my extended family, and some of the land that we I had no idea how many people there were out there and all those kind of things. And so my world was a very small, a very simple world. And when I was 12 years old, just before my 12th birthday, is when they finally sent me off to school. And if you go near the Manitoba border, there's a outside of Dryden, there's a residential school there, Macintosh. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and that's where they sent me the first year. And on February of that year, it burned down. I had nothing to do with it. It's just something that happened. And I spent the rest of the year going to Kenora, to our residential school, Cecilia Jeffrey. That's where I finished the year. The next year, they sent me to Fort Albany, way up in James Bay, where I was among the Cree people. And that's where I spent. When the springtime when I was there, it got flooded, and there was only a little bit of land, about 4 feet of land around the school when we were flooded. I had nothing to do with that either. So they kind of got tired of me. I don't know. So the next year, the Indian Affairs sent me to a little town called Koene. They sent me to a public school there, keep me away from those residential schools and causing a lot of havoc among over there. But I did go there for a couple of years, and a couple of years later, they sent me back to Fort Albany, to St. Anne's School. And and after that, I went to high school, and I started a different life with a little bit of education, a little bit of work, did a lot of work, and everything that I got married when I was 19 years old. Still married to the woman sitting over there watching TV there somewhere. and so it was interesting to talk to a lot of people in my travels and listen to their stories and about the land, about the people. It's very interesting. There's a lot of history when you look at that land, and I was showing a picture once of my home community up in when you're standing on you take a picture across the river, and I was telling those people that were at the meeting, when you look at this picture, there's hundreds of stories in just that little picture. This is about us, our history, and everything. There are stories as you go along those rivers. And when we traveled on those rivers, my father or my grandfather or uncle or somebody would always share stories about some of those rivers, why these rivers have the names that they have, what happened there, and all those kind of things. So a lot of our history is there, and it's very important to keep that, for people to write those stories and keep them. a lot of the old people have passed on now. The ones that traveled a lot on those rivers, they knew those stories, and so some of the communities have been gathering those stories and keeping them and recording them, which is very important. As part of what you see, if you look at the map of Ontario or any map of Canada, there's all those English names on there. They have those names. But long before that, there was always those Anishinaabe names, our names on them, and part of their trying to erase our history is changing the names of those rivers and putting different names on there that we have no connection to. So that's why it's important to keep the names of those rivers and those stories, because this is who we are. This is our history. If you look at the river and you wonder who traveled here 100 years ago, 500 years ago, there's stories that go back a long ways, and that kind of let people know that you've been here a long time. We've been here a long time, ever since the ice receded. When the ice receded further up north, we moved with that. We went further and further up north. Actually, the ice moved back, and so everything that you see in that territory has always been about us. And the same holds true with those other people and wherever people's land you're on. They always have their own stories and their own history about where they are, and that's why they fight so hard to trying to keep that land, because the land is about us. The land is us. We belong to the land. And so without that, we will cease to exist, and along with our traditions, our language, our culture, and it's very important to keep those things. And that's part of what the intent of the residential schools was to erase our history, our language, our culture, and our way of life. There was I met an elder up in Pewanik, and I'm sure maybe some of you are familiar with him. His name was Louis Bird. He went around the coast of James Bay on the Ontario side and also on the Quebec side, gathering stories from the people there, the elders. So he traveled around for 12, 15 years, he said, gathering those stories. And he wrote a book. He wrote a book about those stories that he gathered. And he said there's one thing that he found that a lot of the elders talk about that impacted us in a way, that really changed the way that we lived and what really affects us now. And it's because of those people that came into our land, and there are those things that happened that changed our way of life, really impacted our way of life. The first group of people that arrived in our territory were the fur traders, and they hired native people, or the native people told they to kill a lot of furs, to get a lot of furs and trade for food or other things. And so that changed our relationship with the animals and the land. Now we were competing, and we were trying to outdo each other, and we took more than what we needed. Before that, we only took whatever we needed for that day or for that time. We never took more than that. That was our way. That was our way of life. There'd always be plenty of game, plenty of animals that we can depend on for the future. And the second group of people that arrived in that area were the missionaries, and they brought with them their their Bible and their understanding of God and or Creator. So that changed our relationship with the Creator, because now there were people that have a different understanding of Creator and God, and it created conflict among the people, and the families and the communities begin to they created a division among the communities. And if you look at some of those communities in the present day, especially on the James Bay coast, if you take Port Albany and Kashuchuan, one is Catholic, the other one is Anglican, and they're separated because of what they their belief in a certain church. And the third thing that happened was the treaties, and I think Lyndsay talked about that a little bit. And you're going to talk about. I'll let you talk about it after I'm done. Anyway, and the treaties took the people from the land and they put them in these little boxes because the government wanted the resources, and we were in the way, and said, well, and the churches had a big part of that as well, because they said, well, we can't talk to them because they're all scattered all over the land. We need them to be in one place. And so the government agreed that, but they wanted the resources as well. So the treaties were signed, and people were put on these little boxes where they had to stay. And the fourth thing that happened was the Indian residential schools. What the Indian residential schools did was to take the children from the communities and take the children from their families and take them far away and forbid them to speak their language, forget their culture, where they came from. So a lot of those, and it also took away the purpose for what a man and a woman are supposed to be doing. Man and woman were created so that they can raise children. That's the whole purpose in life. So if you take that away, then you leave them with nothing. You take away their purpose, for their reason for being. And so that started a whole series of social issues when people began to abuse alcohol and all those things, and the children began to not speak their language anymore, nor about the land. They couldn't go home. They couldn't be. They felt they didn't belong at home. Or they couldn't talk to their parents. They couldn't go out in the land, but they didn't know how to do that. They weren't raised in that way. And so, the way we are today, you see what's happening out there, and we see, and how do we fix that? How do we, we hear a lot. When I sat down and I listened to the people sharing stories through the TRC events that were held all across Canada, and the most important thing a lot of them wanted was validation for their stories. They wanted somebody to believe that this happened to them. So when a lot of them stood down in a circle and they shared their stories, and they said, yeah, this is what happened to me. And they said, well, I thought I was the only one. When other people share their stories, they realize that there are other people, same thing happened to a lot of people. And so, and I think that's what we need to do. We need to believe in what they're saying. And I think that's very important even for all of us. That's very important for somebody to believe in us, somebody to validate our existence, that it's important, and that we matter to somebody. And that's a human thing that we all need that. And I think that's what if we go forward and do that, we see recent events across Canada here. Most recently up in Halifax with the lobster fishermen and the pipelines and all of those things. And a lot of times those people stand alone, when they want to protect their land, they want to protect the water, Nobody stands with them. And so if we all can do that, and that's all they wanted. I mean, they wanted validation for their right to the land, to the water, and all of those things. And that's very important, stand with them and acknowledge that they have that right to exist as well. That's a mouthful, eh, Lyndsay?
That was good, Sam. A good mouthful.
Is
Excellent
anybody else
mouthful.
out there?
Yeah. Well, are we able to put the slides back on? Are they on? No, or they're off. Okay, perfect. No, I just wanted to, the word validation. I just want to really hold that word. As Sam and I were talking, preparing for this presentation, Sam mentioned validation quite often, and he just mentioned it again there. And so all through those 4 different areas that Louis Bird references in this book, of the changes that happened to Indigenous people in the Treaty 9 territory and beyond, those things, that people need validation for. And here's another. So treaty making in Treaty 9, and what happened, in 1905 and 1906 is when it began. But I mean, I just want to introduce you to some folk who are part of that colonial story, part of the treaty making story. And so on the left, we have Samuel Stewart. He was apparently a doctor who had come with the Canadian government as part of the treaty making gang. And then we have in the middle, Daniel McMartin, and I just want to come back to him in a minute. And we have the renowned Duncan Campbell Scott over to the right of your screen. And can everyone see those folk from their screens? Yeah. And so those were the folk that came to make treaties in the different locations across the Treaty 9 territory. And they traveled, by canoe, they traveled on land, and by rail, of course, as far as they could. And but they did some traveling, that was for sure. They had translators with them from the communities, and who were working for them, but the people didn't have translators. That was very interesting. It's interesting to point out. I mean, we might all get to that eventually, but yeah, it's interesting to note. And they had lawyers with them as well, which is interesting because they were in position of power and they still brought lawyers. And the people, of course, had no need for lawyers. This was their land, right? And they didn't leave anything behind. So, I mean, recently, if you've ever seen the movie Trick or Treaty, I don't know if anyone's seen Trick or Treaty, but the movie talks about the treaty making process, the Treaty 9 making process, and what happened. And part of what did happen is this giant document was shipped off down south, and there it sits. And so a couple of years ago, the treaty document was actually transported to Moose Cree First Nation, where there was a giant celebration around treaty. And so people got to read and touch and smell this document that had been signed by grandfathers and uncles and fathers, who were part of this treaty making process. Anyway, yeah. So just coming back to Daniel McMartin, not too long ago, probably 10 years ago, or so. There was a student at Queen's University and found the diary of Daniel McMartin. And what a find. Imagine that moment, what it would be like. And so began to scan through and notate what was said in this diary. And there is a clause in the Treaty 9 document that talks, it's called the taking up clause. And the taken up clause states that land can be taken up for this, and sorry, I might be slightly paraphrasing here, but the land can be taken up for the purpose of doing natural resource, economy. And so if it's a lumbering moment or if it's a mining moment, those sorts of things, the land can be taken up. And McMartin references this in his diary. And it's very interesting. Talks about the land and says, hey, but the oral communication that went on that day about the treaty didn't talk forthrightly about this taking up clause at all. In fact, what was said to the people was that you can use this land as you always have. And so the people understood that as part of the treaty, that's what would happen. And so so this was quite a fine piece of history coming to life, and is now part of, like, every story that people tell when they're discussing treaty making and Treaty 9. It's very important because if you look at a map of Treaty 9 and Mining Act in Ontario, the whole of the north is taken up by mining claims. The whole of the north is claimed, and so it's pretty spectacular when you think of what's going on behind that treaty making moment and what McMartin had to say. I'm going to stop there. We can move to that next slide. Hey,
Lyndsay, I'm just, please feel free to go on to the next slide. I do want to make sure that people have time for Q&A as well. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I would encourage people to put questions in the chat at any time if you like, because we want to have time for that bit of dialogue, at least in this chat friendly way. So, but back to you, Lyndsay.
Okay, sorry. I'm just checking the time myself because I completely lost track. So if we skip down to the picture of Poplar Hill, is that okay with you, Sam? If we do this?
Yeah.
Sam?
Go ahead.
Yeah, because I want to finish with you, and yeah, I want to introduce you to Poplar Hill Development School, and this is the school, the elementary school. Crystal Lake and Sterling Lake were also schools in the area, and they were, Crystal was the girls' high school and Sterling Lake was the boys' high school. Wonder if we could just get down to the next slide. So this is a slide, a map actually that we had made up with the with Mushkegowuk's GIS department, and so they placed for us these schools on the map. So you'll see the Crystal Lake and Sterling Lake are sort of off to the right, side by side. And Poplar Hill is right there, Poplar Lake First Nation. And the blue dots represent the 16 or so First Nations. Fort Severn, you can't see because my line of people are hiding it, but it's up there too. Are the communities that were affected by the Mennonite run schools. I'm going to hand it over to Sam.
The start of the schools, in particular, I guess, Poplar Hill is in Stern Lake and Crystal Lake was had the requests of the communities and some of the communities nearby, and they wanted a high school, I guess, for their school for their children, and not to send them so far away. Has had this a lot of our students who are from those communities. A lot of them are here in Thunder Bay. A lot of them are some are in Kenora. So so they're quite a long ways from home. And also, I think it was to and it wasn't too far from their communities. But a lot of times when we it happens when we ask when people ask for something, it never turns out exactly what they want or what they're looking for, and that's true of a lot of the schools and residential schools as well, and even the residential schools that were all sprung up all across Canada. One of the ones that was built in Sault Ste. Marie was a Chinook school, and Chief Chinook, that was the name of the chief that was there, and he had went to Ottawa to ask the prime minister or the government to build a teaching teepee for his people, because he knew that the times were changing, and that people would no longer able to live the way they did, like trapping and hunting, that they would have to find jobs and learn new skills. So he asked the government to build a school uh, uh, for his people here in Sault Ste. Marie. So they did that. They built a Chinook school, and it was under the Anglican church, and so. But it never turned out the vision that he had. Just so much, as much as what Lyndsay was talking about in terms of treaties, what they promised and what they put forth was never the same. And if you Duncan Campbell Scott was a superintendent of Indian Affairs, and he was largely responsible for the development of the Indian residential schools, because John and MacDonald had asked him to, how do you deal with this Indian problem, and that was part of the answer, was to put up these schools, as much as what happened what was happening in the United States. And so that's what they did. And it's ironically, Duncan Campbell Scott's daughter also went to a residential school, and she died there in the school for girls somewhere. And so, so you could understand a lot of times the trust that people have whenever something comes down. I think we're very reluctant to believe or to take take what people are saying to be truth. And we see what's happening now in Northern Ontario. We have the Ring of Fire. They say they have $100 billion there of minerals and stuff like that, and they're not going to leave it alone. They will come up there, and they have claims all over. You look at that northern part of where we are now. We're Margaret Falls is right smack dab in the middle of the Ring of Fire, and so I'm very scared about what will happen down the road, especially the rivers and the land, and we haven't had that much experience with with that amount of people coming up in the Northern Territory. And back in the 60s, we had an Army Corps of Engineers running around Northern Ontario. You see all those rivers on those maps. They were going to take all these rivers and they were going to divert them all south. The Albany, the Adwabascut, and Kenogami, and all of those rivers you see there. They're going to make dams all over, even the smaller rivers. They're going to flood the whole land and divert the river south. And that's how Treaty 9 came to be, how the NAN came to be, because the chiefs got together to fight that, to stop that, the building of all those dams. So when we won little battles here and there, we're still here, and I think, but it's always been a struggle just to maintain our way of life and our way of doing things, and I don't think that we will ever stop. But you'll find that the people are very resilient people, in spite of all those things that happen in our history, in spite of what the government policies and all of those things happened. We're still here. We still have a good sense of humor. We laugh at a lot of those things that happen, and trying to make our own way in this world. And all we want to do is drink Tim Hortons coffee and enjoy life. And it's a very simple life. We're not asking for much. and just to be accepted, and to live among people and share the land, and it's not very complicated to raise our own children and live in peace. That's what everybody wants, right? I mean, that's what I'm sure all of you are listening here. That's all that you want. You want your children to grow up to be happy, healthy, and have a good life. We have no different aspirations for our own children. We want them to be happy, grow up healthy, and do something with their lives. All right, Lyndsay.
All right. So I'm just there's a couple more slides, and is that okay if we keep going then?
Yes,
Scott?
that's great. Sure. And I just if there are no questions, I want to give the time. We do want to create an opportunity for dialogue here if people have questions that they want to put forward. So I really want to encourage everyone on this call to put forward your questions. And in the absence of those, there's a lot of great information and sharing and kudos to you folks on the chat right now. But I want to give the space to you folks to keep talking if there are no questions right now. So feel free to share those other few slides with us, Lyndsay. And definitely by 8:20 we will hand it over to Mim to close in prayer. But
okay,
please feel free.
And I think Sam and I are both want to stay later, like stay after the closing. I mean, if you're still open, if the Zoom will still be open, I don't know.
Yes, yeah. So
yes?
what we'll do, just to be transparent about what happens from here, is I want to give the time to you folks to continue talking. If there's questions, we'll take those. And then after, Mim is going to do a closing prayer. After that, anyone who needs to go is welcome. Like, you can leave without feeling bad that you're leaving in the middle of something. But if people want to stay then afterwards, they can stay afterwards. But if at 8:30 you say, thank you very much and good night, and this applies to anybody, I guess, except for me, you can just say good night and go on your way.
Okay. There was actually a comment about the question about validation. I might explain a little bit more about validation. There's still, I mean, majority of Canadians still are not aware that there were residential schools across the country. I mean, there's down maybe about 10 blocks from me, where I live, where I am right now. There was a residential school there, and people even who lived around that neighborhood didn't know that was a residential school. And so, and we're always fighting that, this, we had generations and generations of people that attended these schools, but nobody knows, nobody believes, they're sharing their stories. And one time, the last event that I went to in Ottawa, and I was on my way back, and it was the closing, I think it was the closing ceremony of the TRC event. I was on my way back, flying back, and I happened to be sitting by a middle-aged lady, it was, and she started asking me if I had attended the event. I said, yeah, I did. And she started talking about some of the abuse that people shared, and she was saying, I listened to all this, and I don't believe that those things happen. I don't believe those stories that people say. I think they're just lying. And she kind of said that. And as I was talking to her a bit more, she told me that she was a nun at one night. And so those kind of things are you just want to shake your head sometime, and when you hear those stories, and there's that need for people to believe that this is part of the Canadian history. This happened, and you can, and when they did gather the final report of the what do you call that? The commission, when they did their report, they identified over 5,000 pedophiles in these schools. Okay? So there was a lot of that happening in these schools, and yet people were not believing that this happened, and still in denial in some that part of that history, and the government still tried so hard to bury those stories, and hoping that it would go away, and they probably will, and there's not so much talk about it now, and I think it just they'll tell you the worst thing you can tell somebody is get over it. That happened 50 years ago, that kind of thing, and we hear that a lot of comments from people, why are you always bringing up the past, those kind of things. But you have to understand that those things that happen to those people, it's not in the past. It's something that they live with every day, and so we have to honor those stories that they shared. That life that this person has been able to live a normal life, because of that experience that happened to them. So we have to help them move along, and come to terms with that experience. And there's somewhere in there has to be that forgiveness, that forgive themselves and forgive whoever was responsible for those things that happened to them. So that's very important. And I think it goes for all of us. When something happens to us, we go tell somebody, what if this person doesn't believe us? What do you do? Do you feel good? You feel bad about it? And so that's the thing that I talk about in terms of validation. Even the church, about we're part of that. And churches never came forward and said, Catholic Church never came forward and apologized for their part in that. And they ran most of the schools in Canada. The Anglican Church came up with an apology, and they traveled around to gatherings and stuff like that, and took part in their conferences and gatherings. And so that's very important, that just to validate their stories and their what they say.
Sam, what you're saying is really powerful, and it's obviously impacting people and a number of questions have come up. I think Peter has a few questions that he wanted to bring forward. So I want to give the floor to him for a moment, and we want to hear more from you once he's shared those questions.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for what you've shared with us. Just as I've been watching the chat, many people offering their thanks. So just want to raise that specifically. One question, Sam, that came in was just very early on in your story as you were talking about growing up on the land. Someone was wondering when, kind of what years that was that you were living that way.
Oh, you want to know how old I am?
That came in anonymously, so I'm not going to say who asked. But it's because you look so young, I think.
I know. Yeah, well, I was born in 1953, and that was way before the last time that Toronto Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup. I was around. I saw them. I think it was one of the first times that I ever watched TV in one of the residential schools in Cecilia Jeffrey, where I watched the Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup long time ago. And 1953, I was born. I went to school in the fall of 1964, September. So I lived out in the bush between that 53 to 64. And we didn't have no running water, no mosquitoes. We had an outboard, and so life was a lot different back then than what it is now. And most of you probably have never been without electricity or water, running water in your lifetime. And so I've been around and seen a lot of things, and I've seen a lot of changes in our way of life, in the world as well. I guess now here I am talking to people on this little thing I'm holding in my hand, all across this country. And so that was between 1953 and 1965 when I was out in the bush there, living out in the land. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. I had another question. People were really appreciated what you shared about the stories of the rivers and the efforts to record those stories and remember the names of the rivers and the land and things like that. Yeah. And then when you reference the threats to the rivers from like the Ring of Fire and the story about the plans to make dams, I'm wondering, the question is, can you connect for us the efforts to recover these stories and the names of the rivers with the efforts to protect the rivers?
Where we are in my community, the Albany River, the Uki River, the Kenogami River have all been dammed. They diverted the water south. In the Albany Lake St. Joseph by Pickle Lake, they diverted the water south to Manitoba, Lake Winnipeg. And Uki River, they diverted south to Lake Superior. Same thing with Kenogami. So all of those hydro dams that they built come from our water. And so that was our contribution. A lot of the water creates a hazard that people live in. And I think I kind of look at the Ring of Fire as our last untouched piece of land in the world. I think where there's no development, nothing happening in the pretty well the Treaty 9 area. I think there's no place like that. There's no place left in the world where a place like that. So I think we need to stand. We need to make sure that we keep the waters, we keep the the way they were, and trying to keep them. We have to have something, right? And I think how it's going to look like, how we're going to do that, I think is yet to come, because now they're just talk about, what they're going to do, the mining and stuff like that. I think somewhere down the road, we're going to have to develop some kind of a plan on how we're going to do this. And a lot of the time there's going to be a conflict between the leaders of those communities and the grassroots people. And I think the leaders a lot of time look at the development and economy and employment for their people. I think that's what they look for. But we have to try and somewhere in the middle, that we have to find a way that we have to keep the waters, we have to keep the rivers, we have to keep the animals. It's not the same as it was when I was young. Like the fishing, the water levels are really different because of the hydro dam that we built there. I know that's kind of a long answer to your question, but I think how we're going to do that is yet to come. I'm gearing up for a fight.
Well, no, I appreciate you taking the time to answer that. And I do remember as you were speaking, you talked about what I heard was, the call for people to show up in solidarity with land defenders. So someone was asking a question in the chat about, what more, how important it is for us to validate the stories of survivors, but what else can people do? And I wondered if you want to talk a bit about even support for land defenders and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think mainly that's where we're at now, and I think you see that spring up every now and then. Recently up in Halifax and also in Brantford, what's happening there, and also up in the pipeline that they're building up in BC in the mountains through the territory, through the First Peoples territory there. And these kind of things are they feel like they're alone, that nobody wants to stand with them. And I think it was a very quiet and from the media what was happening in Halifax with the lobster fishermen. There was no outcry from people saying, hey, that's not right, and those kind of things. And it turns out that they bought a company that they sell the lobsters to. Now the fishermen are working for them now, and which is I guess a good story, a good ending to that story. But it's always been there. The conflict has always been there, and I think we've always been pushed to do that, because to make a stand for the land that we have, the water that we have, and every now and then they push a little bit forward, a little bit more. So I think if we acknowledge that, like you said, a lot of the people, when we began, acknowledge the territory that they're on, and if we know that, well, this is their territory, they have the right to it, and we're all treaty people, I mean, all of you have homes, businesses, or whatever. You have those because treaties were signed, and people forget that. And we agreed to share the land with those that came, and to share the land with us. But it's usually one-sided. So there's not so much give on the other side. So, if we can achieve that, I think that would be great.
Oh, thanks for that.
Peter, can I just want to add a little something here. Just around the question, what else can we do? And there have been a couple of other comments about other people being involved with schools, either as teachers or supporters or and so on. And like Sam just said, we're all treaty people. We're part of the story, and so. I have a request. One of the things that came out of the closing TRC in Ottawa was that people, and this came from one of the survivors from the Mennonite schools, was talking about pictures. And how that person longs for pictures. And they also made a record at the Mennonite residential schools of the children singing. And the children themselves that attended don't necessarily have copies of these things, the pictures of and if people are listening and you know of people, or you yourself happen to have some of those, what I call treasures, what the people up north would call treasures, let us know, please. Thanks. And I'm
I think it's important as well to keep that history alive. Don't let them bury the history of what happened.
Mhm.
And as a lot of people are teachers, you teach your children about those things. That's part of the whole Canadian story. It's not all about Henry Hudson and Samuel de Champlain and all of those things that I learned about when I was in school. It's all, we were here long before that, and we should learn our history as well. I think, and we had laws, we had our those kind of things, and we're a society now. We had everything. We had government, we had laws, and we had all of those things, and we had gardening and taking care of forests and all of those things, and not so much as talk about those things. Okay? And so we need a lot of things, same as what constellations, stars, all of those things. We need those things. So how did we know those things if we never talked to you guys before 1491? Okay? We had that knowledge. Aliens.
Yeah. Perhaps Lyndsay, you could take this next question. A few questions specifically about Mennonite involvement. So there's a question that came to me. Do you have the years that the Mennonite residential schools operated? Have Mennonites apologized for the schools, or what types of responsibility have the Mennonites taken for their complicity in the schools and these greater systems?
Wow, that's loaded. I certainly won't try and speak for everyone, but so the first question was, Peter, sorry, I forgot the first question by the time we got to the end.
Yeah, that's fair.
No, sorry.
That was me cutting down a couple of questions.
No, just fresh.
Yeah, just some interest in, if you happen to have at your fingertips some of the facts around when the schools operated. Yeah.
So I think it was 69 that they opened, hey? And Sam, you can help me, please, if you happen to realize. 69 they opened, I think, and it was the early 90s that they closed. Am I correct, sir?
Yeah. I think Poplar Hill was in 65, 66, around there.
Okay.
And Sterling and that were about 68. They weren't up very long, eh?
Yeah, a little later in the 60s, yeah.
Most of them closed in the 70s or late 70s. So they weren't around too long. That's when the communities began to take over their schools, have schools in their communities. And everything kind of closed down.
Right.
Yeah. Was that the question? Yeah.
And well, then it went on, and we're talking about there were 3 questions in one question, right?
Sure. Yeah. Just questions. Has the Mennonite Church made an apology, or what? Yeah. Basically, what sort of responses have been made that you're aware of?
Well, it's a written apology. It's on the Mennonite Central Committee website. If you go to the Indigenous Neighbors piece of our website, and it's toward the end. It's an apology, and it was actually presented at an event we had, Mending the Sacred Hoop, that was held at Conrad Grable a while back, 2014. And anyway, so it was Merle Nisley who came to that event and talked about the schools. He was a teacher at Poplar Hill. Some of you here on the call may know Merle. And he read that apology out loud, and there were a number of Indigenous people in the room, and it was a pretty powerful moment. It was really quite a powerful moment. And there was a hug in the middle of the room. I'll just leave it there and let you know with our big circle what happened there. But that was a good thing. I certainly, so the third question was about remorse, or how are people feeling? You know, Merle talks openly about, he talks about, and he's just said it recently because he'll be doing he'll be part of a podcast that MCC is doing on the school. And but he talks about the evil of these schools that they inherently were, because when you take a child from a family, there's nothing really good that comes of that when it's years at a time, you know. And it's not good for the family, it's not good for the child, and all sorts of things go wrong. And that's what happened, exactly what happened. So Merle talks about that, but he's one teacher, one person, and I know there are others out there. And again, I'm encouraging, I would love to encourage you, if you're listening and you have stories about the schools, to write them down the same way Sam is collecting the oral stories from elders in communities. Let's do the same in this community here, and let's collect those. You know, they're as valuable, because we need all sides of that same story to make it whole.
Thank you very much, Lyndsay. There is no good time to do this, but I'm going to invite, I want to first thank the speakers, then I'm going to invite, as I said, for Mim to do the closing prayer. And then this is not cutting off the conversation, and perfect timing on your drink there, Lyndsay, because no, but it's good. So I'll thank the speakers. I'll hand it over to Mim, and then we're gonna have more time if people want to join. But I want to make sure that people who said this thing was going to be over at 8:30, that it'll be pretty close to 8:30, that you can say goodnight if you wish. So thank you so much for everything that you've shared tonight. It's been wonderful to be part of this, and I'm sure that everyone would agree with that. It's been a powerful evening of sharing. It's been wonderful that we've been able to do this, to have people from literally across the huge expanse of Ontario and beyond to be part of this. And we're, if we haven't already, we are going to send you folks mugs from Phil Yordy. He's a potter here on, he has a shop here on Block 3 of the Haldeman territory. And this is the mug that Lisa is showing on the screen here, that we're going to be sending to you, that you can, when you drink from it, you'll remember this gathering of people online. So thank you so much for your sharing here tonight. And I'm going to hand it over to Mim and I invite you to close in prayer for us, Mim. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to get my thoughts together a little bit. It's brought back a lot of memories for me, and pieces of my childhood that I still am working through. But I want to honor Sam for opening and being vulnerable and truth-telling, because that's important. And story for Indigenous people is very important. That's how we learn. That's how we pass on our knowledge and our teachings. And I want you also to remember, when we talk about the land, when Sam talked about being out on the land, it's not just the people, it's the other creatures that are out there as well. We share this land not only with the human beings, but with the four-leggeds and the two-leggeds and the winged ones and the ones in the water. And so we need to be mindful of that as we journey on, that we are here as caretakers, and we are living with all things on this planet that we call Earth. It is not ours. It is ours to share. I've relit the smudge here, so I'll virtually ask you to clean your minds and calm yourself so you have a good night's rest. And I hope that you take what you heard tonight, put it in a cup and put it on the shelf for tonight. But tomorrow, take that cup and look in it again. And take each little piece out, each little drop in that cup out that you heard tonight, and look at it. Look into it a little bit deeper. If you put a drop of water under a microscope, there's a whole lot of things our eyes don't see. And that's the same with the conversation tonight. And so as you journey on, I hope you take these words and you remember, and that you pass on to those who don't understand and those who have not listened to these stories, that Indigenous people are still here. We're very resilient, because otherwise we would be gone. There's something in our DNA and in our blood that it's given us hope to keep on walking. But that hope sometimes is tough to have, because these conversations don't always happen. And sometimes when they do happen, like Sam said, we're told, can't you just get over it? Or you must remember wrong. That couldn't be what happened. Nobody would do that to a child, but they have. And those stories need to be heard. They need to be taken seriously, and they need to be honored, and they need to be looked at. And our responsibility needs to be acknowledged, each and every one, not just the students and the families, but to the children of all those families as well. I have 3 brothers, like my foster brothers, like my brothers by heart, who went through the residential school system, and I saw it firsthand, and it's tough, and their children have suffered as well. So this isn't going to go away anytime soon. There's no overnight snap your fingers magic solution. It's going to take work on all our parts, and it's going to take you walking with Indigenous people on this path to make this world a better place. So I encourage you to change the narrative starting today and going forward, so we can all walk together in a good way. Blessings to you. Walk well, walk strong, stay healthy, stay safe, and use your voice to change the world starting tonight. Miigwech, Nawe, Amen.
Oh, leave it. To a
So
Maple Leaf fan, eh?
Should we take more questions, Sam?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can bring another of the questions that was shared. I just have to find it because I wrote it down a little while ago.
Peter, just before you get into that, can we agree that we will say 8:50, that we will put a hard stop, just because we could go on all night long, I think, but let's just be kind to ourselves and say 8:50 at the absolute latest. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
I promise I will stop asking questions at 8:50.
And I just want to tell you, Sam, you look very angelic right now.
I am. I got a halo.
The light on your ceiling is sort of sitting on top of your head. Like,
Yeah.
You're looking very angelic right now.
So one of the questions that came in, actually, Sam, you mentioned the desire of communities to have their children educated closer to home. And we know that the end of the residential schools hasn't resolved this. I hear that this is still a very significant issue. And you mentioned students having to travel to Thunder Bay. So the question is, do you know how many communities in Treaty 9 don't have full education in their communities, or kind of that particular issue?
I think there's only a couple that do have high schools. I think Achneepineskum does, because it's a very large community. I think about 4,000 or something like that. So they have 1,200 students in their school. At Wabascut, I'm not too sure if they have a high school.
Yeah, they have a high school.
They have, yeah, okay,
They
yeah, I
have
went there.
Vesna, yeah.
Father Business School. And Mosinee, of course, and the road access ones don't have the high school in their communities, but they go to a nearby urban area along the highway, Geraldton, Hurst, and Caps Casing, and those places where they had Timmins. And, they bus them to nearby high schools. But if you see all of those communities up in the north of the railroad, they all either go to Thunder Bay, so look out to a majority of them. We have a all native high school here in Thunder Bay, and there's probably about a couple hundred students there. Well, I would imagine they're probably about 500. That's a very modest estimate. 500 high school students here in Thunder Bay. I know we have about 60 from our community that are here, 60, 70 kids. So, and but a lot of the parents have lately been moving to an urban center to with their kids when they go to school. And so, because they don't want them to, a lot of safety issues here in Thunder Bay. I'm sure some of you have heard stories about Thunder Bay. So a lot of the parents don't feel safe in letting their children come here by themselves. And there's a lot of safety issues and those kind of things. And when they do the best, and they have 24-hour monitoring. They have workers that go out there. They patrol the streets and trying to keep the students safe as possible. But these things still happen in spite of all that. Anybody out there? Just you and me, Lyndsay.
No, same thing happens in Timmins, Sam. The same thing happens in Timmins. No, we have quite a few schools, high school students especially, that are dropping down from the remote communities. And some of them have high schools, like out of Wabascut, but they want to get a better education because it's a pretty well-known fact that the teaching in the north is not consistent, and you might not get the best of teachers all the time, or you don't get enough teachers, and so then students suffer, right, in that education system. As we, even further south, you can understand those problems. So some parents will opt to move, like Sam's saying.
I remember.
The kids are always behind, and when we tested the kids, we find there were a couple of grades behind what there should be. So they have a difficult time transitioning to high school when they come to the city. Yeah.
I had a story from visiting a community in Treaty 3 a number of years ago, and I was meeting someone at the high school in that community to get a key for a building, and the receptionist saw me kind of walk in with this other kind of young white woman, and said, "Oh, you guys teachers? Would you like a job?" And we kind of thought, "Oh, is this a joke?" And then it turned out that he was the principal of the school, and he was just talking. We got talking a bit about this, and he explained some of the structural issues where we all know that schools on reserves are categorically underfunded, and they could maybe hire a new teacher, but because teachers' salaries go up after I think 1 year or 2 years, that was the point at which they could no longer afford to have them. So
Yeah.
they weren't able, even if there were teachers who wanted, experienced teachers who wanted to work on reserves, they couldn't afford to do that. And it just really got me thinking about the structural issues in that. So yeah, thanks for adding a whole bunch of things I hadn't even thought of.
Yeah, and speaking of the underfunding, like if you go to any public or high school or Catholic high school, they in Thunder Bay, I think it's about $20,000 per student that the government pays. And I talked about a native high school here. They only get $8,000 per student. What's the difference?
Mhm.
And so even if we do build high school, you still get underfunded. One of the schools that here charges $28,000 per student.
And just on the topic of education, in the omnibus package that Ford, our premier, passed while we were all dealing with COVID. There were a lot of environmental things in it, but one of them had to do with education and Indigenous education at that. So I mean, if a person comes down from the coast, their community pays to go to a public high school in that community, whether it's Timmins or Thunder Bay or wherever, and they're looking at readjusting those fees. And so that's part of the omnibus piece, as well as looking at readjusting the money that's allotted for post-secondary school that goes to First Nations. So, I mean, have a look at that provincially. That's something that's, well, I know Mushkegowuk Council is working at and has written a letter about recently.
I had another question. I'll just read it. Is there hope in a renewal of Indigenous law to help litigate in the Ring of Fire conflict with the rights of the people of Ascii Nation?
Oh, wow. I don't know. It's you'll have to. I guess that will be a kind of hard question to answer.
10 words or less.
Not being a leader of any community or anything like that. I think whatever the leaders, my community is actively working on all-season road going through the Ring of Fire. They've been doing that for the last couple of years. They're into the environmental study now. We know, and I've been speaking against it, but I know that eventually it has to happen. But I want to ensure that they do as minimal damage as possible while doing that. And not only that, but we'll have all kinds of people running around up there with their RVs and the fishermen and the sportsmen and all those kind of things. We'll have an invasion. 1491 relived again. 1492.
And not everyone's on the same side. I'm certainly not living in First Nation, but yeah, certainly there are very differing opinions around the Ring of Fire, depending on who you talk to. With any, I tell this story about De Beers that moved to Attawapiskat and built the Victor mine, which is now ending its stay. But during the boom of the Victor mine, a lot of Attawapiskat people had money, all of a sudden had a job, and then had money for their families. So I talk about the disparity, it's just horrible, the inequity that you could see between, the diamond being auctioned off, God knows where, and then you had, an impoverished community. And, but then I remember George that walked into our office one day and was almost in tears because he had a job at De Beers and he could buy snow suits for his kids and new boots. And he was like on top of the world. And so, I mean, you know, it's really difficult, all this, you know, the economic development piece of it and what that means around jobs and so on too. So it's not so easy,
No.
depending on who you talk to.
Yeah, there'll always be. We got 5 minutes.
Pardon?
4 minutes. 4 minutes
Yeah.
now.
Oh,
4 minutes. That's what I was told.
Well, anyway, you know, for all of you who are listening out here, still on there, and I hope that you make that really an effort to learn more, you know, about the history of Ontario, history of Canada, and speak your voice. On 26th of November, there's an Audible, a bunch of podcasts, I think they're called, coming out. So with CBC and stuff like that. That's why I did part of that with Tanya Talega. And somebody had a question there about the 7 Pollen feathers. A little note. Yeah, the 7 Pollen feather was a book that was written about all those young people they found on the rivers and the inquest that followed, and where the Massey lectures were all about 7 Pollen feathers that went across Canada. So I was proud of that. I was part of that, and traveling with Tanya, and also speaking here in Thunder Bay, and still speaking out loud. Yeah, you know, whenever I get a chance. And I think that the Audible, the podcast I'm talking about are about we do some teachings about 7 truths, grandfathers. So I'm here there a little bit. So if anybody wants to care to listen, it'll be on Audible on 26th.
That's great. That's next Thursday, I think.
A little advertisement there, free advertisement. Okay, that's enough for me.
Well, unless there are other burning questions waiting in the queue, I think that is a good note to end on. And I just want to say, I mean, the first thank you, obviously, to our speakers tonight, Sam and Lyndsay. It's been wonderful. There's been so much said in the chat. I hope that you get to read that beautiful, powerful, you know, thank you a million times in the chat that I'm reflecting back from the group. I want to say thank you to everybody who was involved in organizing this and making this event happen. And I can't go without thanking everyone who joined us, because it wouldn't have been an event without you and your questions and your listening and your interest and your ongoing interest. And I think I'll just end by saying that this is, we want this to be the start of a conversation. This is not like, thanks very much, I know all I need to know now. This is only the beginning. And there's so much more to learn and so much more to talk about and so much more to do when it comes to these issues. So thank you so much for joining us, and stay safe and stay well, and have a good evening.